Okay, guys, we are live. Welcome, everyone. It's our 10th event. We're now running them every month. So it's going to be a lot of these events this year. And we are really excited to get all of you here. Today, we have a really great topic about the choosing of a virtual agent platform. What should the approach for choosing them? What are tips and tricks? And we're going to have Dennis and Bora presenting on this topic. And then we're going to have very strong panel with Sharon, Adrian, and Andrew talking about the challenges with choosing of the platform and every other questions you guys might have. A bit of housekeeping. I'm still admitting all people in the room, so maybe Bora, you can take care of the meeting. There are 3 key pillars of our meetup that we have. The first one is openness. So our meetup is to openly share our challenges. If there are some things that you can't say on the recording, we have a special session after we end in the recording where we can discuss them deeper. But we expect like honest answers on the challenges. So this way we can learn together. We want everybody here willing to share, and we invite guys to speak up and to talk about the topics, and the more people from our community talk, the better. And this meetup created by practitioners and for practitioners. The key goal for meetup, just to learn together the topics that there is no books about them, there is no a lot of the different materials or best practices. We are all figuring them out together and then using them. I'd like to acknowledge our amazing team of organizers, Bora, Dennis, Peter. You really breathe a lot of the life into this event, and now we're doing them every month and have a lot of speakers here, and really I'm enjoying working with all of you guys. I'd like to thank EPAM to support our initiatives across APAC. This allows me to spend time on organizing these things and supporting them. And what is very important, I want to thank every member of our community for investing your time. At least 2-3 hours of your time you invest in here, and I hope these investments are going to pay off. We have our chat window here for everybody to collaborate, and typically it's very live here, very dense conversations happening. Also, you please use chat window to ask speakers a question, but please name the speaker who you want to ask questions, so it would be easier for us to manage, and also write down like it's a question. And with that, I want to hand over to Bora to do some shout outs about jobs and also introduce what will be our next event, and then we'll start our event. So Bora, over to you.
And here's the unmute button. So hello, I've been trying to really pull this one together, and really lots of work from Dennis' side, who's been helping a lot out to make this one happening. So thank you for that. And yeah, there's been 3 jobs that came up. One actually already disappeared, as I understand. There's ABC has brought out an event. Sorry, what I was saying. A job, which is a software engineer in the voice bot space. More details can be asked to Michael Collette, who wants to be in the call. Can you maybe say hello, Michael?
Yes. Can you all hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Terrific. Yes, it's great to meet you all. I'm a conversation designer at the ABC. So I'm the conversation designer who's working on, well, I've worked on chatbots in the past. I was one of the co-creators of the ABC News on Messenger chatbot. But specifically, we're creating an Alexa skill at the moment for ABC Emergency. So yes, we were hoping to just let everyone know about that opportunity, because I'm sure there's going to be a crossover of interest. But other than that, I'm just really interested to be here tonight. And if you have any questions for me, feel free to ask those in the chat as well.
Thank you very much. So yes, and I just posted a link there as well for everybody to read the job ad, and for anybody who's looking out for that. Westpac, actually, I just found out that they just closed. They had just 2 roles for, for analysts for the virtual assistant space. So they just seem to have closed the taking in job ads, and there's an other company was just mentioned that I didn't get yet a confirmation 100% that they were allowed to name them, but for a like mid-range conversation designer in Sydney, as far as I know. So if that's a topic if that's something that you're looking for as a role of interest, then just ping me directly, and yeah, I'll get you in contact with them. Okay. So those are the 3 jobs right now, and there might be, if anybody else has any known jobs or jobs in their organization out, then please feel free to let us know right now, or otherwise post in the chat. And yeah, I thought we
Bor, I
wanted
think
to
I can also make a shout
Yep,
out. If
go for it.
guys, yeah, I'm looking for the Google Dialogflow developer and conversational designers, guys. If you think, yep, you have a good experience in this one, just reach out to me and we will have a discussion. Yeah, I think this topic is really, really growing of interest. So we're going to have probably a lot of jobs soon.
Yeah, I saw Google as well having a role out as a conversational architect, I think, I believe it was. So there's lots of roles at the moment out in that space, and there's lots of change of seats and things like that. As multiple people here in the room have just started new companies and new roles in the last weeks in that space. So there's a lot of activity going on in this space. With that, if there's nobody else that has anything, then otherwise just ping and post and let everybody else know. Otherwise, I will hand over now to Dennis, who will kick off the first part about how to approach to selecting a virtual agent platform. This part will be about setting yourself up for success. And I will take then a second round after that. And feel free to ping questions in between.
Cool. Thank you, Bora, for sharing that. And looking at the previous poll results, what I was planning to speak about today was sort of, I guess, considerations as well as the approach to doing it, and what to consider in terms of what you want on the platform, as well as, I guess, an approach that I would recommend moving forwards. And I think this just comes out of real experience when I was at Transport for New South Wales. Just by way of background, I've been in this space for almost 2 decades, having studied the subject of language technology and AI and natural language processing. I wrote my thesis on conversational design in the university domain. So logged in and unlogged in authenticated areas to, get my diary schedule for what classes are on or my exam results. I taught the subject of conversational design back in 2003, and quite interesting list of shout outs today kind of reminds me of a conversation I had back around that time with I think Debbie's joined us today from Macquarie University, and that's where I studied. And at the time, I remember Robert Dale asking me, should we continue this course? Are there enough jobs out there? And back in the early 2000s, I had to put my hand on heart and say, sorry, there aren't that many jobs in the space of conversational designers, NLP, or jobs in that space. And I think that market has shifted now, which is really promising to see that I think there are lots of courses online for conversational design, as well as, the shout out to you are a testament to the number of roles being spun up in Australia alone in this space, which is great news. I co-founded a company doing research in the medical space and language translation. So again, language related. And then I worked for a company for 12 years, just launching and rolling out, maintaining, tuning, doing conversational designs of all things NLP and voice and chatbots. And then over at Transport, I think, which is where I learned a lot of my lessons on the client side of the fence, was around, I just working, I guess, in a very large organization, government organization, trying to put the strategy together for automation. We managed to win a number of awards. I think the top one was being shortlisted as a finalist for the Prime Minister's Award for Excellence within the government sector. So I think I come with some experience in the space, and hopefully can share some insights that you'll take away and have a successful project as well. And these days I'm back sort of consulting on the side, helping organizations just adopt best practices and I guess steer them in the right direction for success. Quote I saw from Gartner at one stage around technology being, the transition being quite disruptive and costly and unavoidable. I think, if you look at the market trends, there is a general shift away from I guess, digital transformation towards AI transformation, as I would call it. I think there's a strong need for skills in this space to get your hands on and understand how it works. So if you're new to this space, I'd suggest tinker, do a tutorial online, pick your platform, Google, Amazon, IBM, etc. Run a course, do it, learn, because I think these skills are going to continue to grow, and I think the market will pick up as well. But to my talk, I thought I'd frame it, and this is just really lessons learned from my personal experience. I thought I'd frame it around the why, the what, and the how around platform selection. And I think, when you're looking at the whys, some of the questions that do come up, is how do I manage the budget that I've got, or the resources I've got, or the ROI, return on investment impacts. It's quite a challenge at times to know and to forecast what's going to happen next, how much things are going to cost. You can be stuck in a sinkhole, and it can be hard to move away later on, or technology doesn't meet your needs. There is an evolving landscape as well. And so I think this is a picture I just picked off VentureBeat online, 2017, just shows the landscape of all the bot vendors. And I'm sure there's a lot more than that now. But the landscape's constantly evolving. So you're like, what do we do about that? How do we include that information, or just be aware of that in our decision-making processes? And the final one is around, how do we avoid analysis paralysis before we go to the market? How do we launch quicker? Because a bunch of other companies are competing in the same space, looking for both return on investments or better customer experiences. How do we, or you as organizations building bots, launch faster so that the outcomes are reached sooner? In the what space, I'll talk about, what to consider, and, also how to go about doing it. I guess a process that I feel has been useful for me in the transportation space. And again, drop any questions you have along the way. I think someone's going to curate questions as we go. And I do want to, I guess, highlight that from a consideration standpoint, I think it is very important to be aware of this past, present, and future timeline. I think quite often I see companies thinking about the past of what they've got and only, scoping platform selection based on that, or they're doing a POC, initial pilot or trial. They want to keep the scope small, so they pick a platform to suit that need in the present. And I also see companies that sometimes too forward facing, constantly looking at the future, can't make a decision, or they don't know who to get in bed with from a vendor perspective on the platform, and they can't make decisions. So I think just be conscious that you probably will have a journey that looks in the past and what is your tech stack, what tools you have today. They may shift in the future with your CRM, your content platforms, etc. Any escalations to a live environment or messaging environment, both your past needs, your current needs, and future needs, and just have that in your mind as you go about your selection process. And I guess I've just shortlisted a couple of things I thought worth discussing to some degree, which is around the strategy, what's driving your end outcome. I do hear cases where executives are like, just build a bot, and the team can flounder about not knowing, what is it we're trying to achieve. And some have a very strong focus on dollar savings, and so it's all cost-cutting exercises. I think if you go in with your eyes open, with a clear idea on what your business, your company's strategy, which channels they want to be in, or where they want to be now and in the future. Like, you may not do social media well today, but you may want to be in social media in the near future, because that's where a lot of people are. Then make sure that's part of your considerations of the future state, as well as the drivers and goals you're trying to achieve. I guess a lot of what I'll talk about really just points out things to think about, and I guess boundaries, pros and cons. I'll leave it up to you to make some of these decisions. Maturity is an important piece, or really the capability of your team. How are you structured? Are you aiming to build something tactically because you just want to trial something or prove that bots work for your organization? Are you vested in building a strategic outcome and you want to save some dollars? Or are you going for a transformational fully where our company is fully vested in AI and all the bells and whistles that come with it? We've got a center of excellence. We want to transform it so every business unit understands AI. Understand where your organization is on that journey, where it will be in the future, will help you just make some decisions in the future that kind of impact the platform selection. I think a lot of people focus just on the business case or the use case and the scenarios of what the functional platform needs are. I do this year, but we go into a little bit of more detail in the next few slides. Something that I often see companies neglect, they'll build bots out, but they forget to focus on the benefits, the ROI, and the costs. I think if you're exploring platforms, explore the costs, ask, if we have this volume or this many channels, what's it going to cost? So you can budget for it and make sure I'll talk through benefits later from a business standpoint, make sure you have a very clear set of benefits you are aiming to achieve. So then you can link the two between the budgets and what you're spending on your platform and the resources of your maturity and your team to execute the use cases and deliver an ROI. I think at the end of the day, we can do these things as a nice to have or innovation activity, but I feel as an industry and why I participate in these and give my spare time to this is that if we don't uplift our game to deliver benefits, it's going to be a bit of a, well, that didn't really work. And we're happy to stick with other channels like mobile app or web browsers for the short term or the near term, which I think would be a massive shame to miss that boat, because there's a wealth of people that come to these talks, understand how to do these well, execute them well. So it's a bit of a known process. Understanding your operational model, how involved you want to be moving forwards, whether you just want to outsource it all to a vendor, whether you want to give it to the IT department to build your experiences and manage the technology stack and integrations, or whether you want to move it into the hands of your business or business units to then create experiences to maintain the bots as well. I have a slide later that talks about the kind of resources you need. And I guess you could choose where these fit, whether they're part vendor, part IT, or part within your business. I think that's a consideration of what your both present operating model looks like, as well as what your future operating model will need to look like. And of course, we have existing tech stack constraints. Often we have a vested party in an organization saying we want a particular tech stack and we cannot move away from it. We're in bed with this partner and we'll use everything they've got in their suite of tools, which might mean that your needs for budget or your benefits aren't going to be met, or at least you can go with your eyes open, knowing that, hey, some of our use cases and based on our maturity and the outcomes we want, this platform and existing tech stack we've got might not cut it, but at least your exec team will understand that as you move forwards. So I guess deep diving into the maturity space, I typically talk about this as 3 horizons of initializing, industrializing, and institutionalizing your AI capability, whether that's in chatbots or machine learning. And really it's, do your POCs and pilots, prove that you can deliver an ROI or the use cases work and technology hangs together. You want to then productionize that and start to deliver and realize your benefits. And then when that happens and when you're making good wins, you probably want to then share that with the rest of your organization, onboard other people to your platform and share your learnings internally and just grow from there. On the use case side, we typically see, I guess, broad categorizations of how bots are being used, or voice assistants as well, to answer what's commonly known as FAQ or question and answer, Q&A, which can be underpinned by a knowledge base or your website or documents in a source repository, or just handcrafted as well. So just Q&A questions with some maybe disambiguation about what topic people are asking for, and then an answer is given. A key area is around routing. So whether that's categorization of something like customer feedback or a complaint or an inquiry, routing that inquiry to the correct place is an important piece. I think we see it used in call centers about, large call centers have different skills and different teams that manage different areas. So routing a customer's inquiry to the correct area is really important. But equally, routing, what we start to see is companies as they grow into the 3rd phase of institutionalization, they start to have a lot of bots in their environment. And so there is, I guess, again, a stepping ladder or increasing of maturity around how you manage your POC bot or your trial to multiple bots to then consolidation again. And it's no different to the call center space. You might spin up multiple call centers to get the business running. And then down the track, you're like, hey, business is shifting, let's consolidate. So routing kind of becomes important about routing inquiries or orchestration between bots, You know, the Microsoft platform, for example, has an orchestration of bots, you know, a layer that will hand off inquiries to sub-bots as well. So an important piece is just understanding how you do that. Form fillings are a common approach that isn't always best suited to bots. You know, I would not like to fill in my tax return through a bot of any sort. I think that would be quite painful, but I think getting FAQs and how-tos along my tax return submission might be useful about what does this field mean? What happens if I put this value in or select this option? That might be useful. Most organizations will move down the API space. So if you're in food delivery, like an Uber, booking a taxi, Pizza Hut ordering food, or if you're in the banking space doing transfers of finances or money, in the transportation space, you know, what's trip plans or service disruptions, and any API your business has, tapping into that to automate activities. And then another area we see users is just identifying and verifying who customers are. Benefits. Again, I said a lot of people don't really focus on benefits, and this slide is, I've taken the Gartner framework around customer experience, and I've munched it together and applied it with a bots lens, whether that's, you know, voice bots, chat bots, text-based, or voice assistants. So these are the categories that you'll see Gartner recommend you measure on, and in a similar manner, you can brainstorm and think of ideas of how the chatbot impacts your employees, your operations, your customer satisfaction and loyalty and advocacy. And from there, I strongly advocate, you know, turning that into benefits, so then you can articulate to your business and your stakeholders that ROI in return. And that way you go in with not just saying we're going to cost cut by deflection of our call center, but you have a list of other benefits you're going to target and deliver to your business. And then from a, I guess, operational model, this is a lean and agile approach that I prefer to see organizations apply in building their bots, is once having, you know, their persona defined and the language and tone up front. I think it's use case selection or prioritization to design of your dialogues. I think it's important to do sample dialogue and draft experiences to both showcase to stakeholders as well as to users to get user input before you go off and build them. Obviously, there's a conversational design element and testing and stakeholder endorsements, but then there are the building activities around the natural language processing or the training of your intents, building the flows and disambiguation, managing your content, accessing APIs and testing. A piece that I often see missing is around the marketing and change adoption. It's an awareness piece, essentially. A lot of businesses like to build new shiny things and they forget to market it and make sure it's visible to other customers to use. And they forget to internally just shout out about what they're doing, how it's improving. So there's a lot of activities here that are missing as well. And I'm sure many people here already in the bot space acknowledge this in the AI space, but for those that don't, there is a strong need to do a regular updates and maintenance on your bot performance early on. We do like to see companies doing, I guess, calibration or tuning activities on a daily basis, tapering to weekly, then monthly basis on review on adding new intents or training phrases to the performance of the NLU. And also taking some of those learnings into your design stage as well as use case selection, because I think we often see resources split between conversation design and I guess the analytics side of things there. They can be two different people, but then you get UX designers that are kind of designing things without getting feedback about whether it works, what's the volume of people using it, people interacting with it in the way they expected. So you do need to close that loop back from the learning perspective to help the conversation designers build, I guess, quality experiences. Next slide. So that's the sort of the why and the things to consider about what you're building. The what to look for. I think Bora is actually going to dive into a whole lot of detail around this. So in fact, I've just got this here more as a placeholder of my slides. I'll leave it to Bora to dive into, I guess, a lot of these functions that you might find useful. And I think it was the poll's second highest ranking input. And so, considering what experiences you want, buttons and carousels, whether you're doing content, how you do content, how you do management of that content for liveness and expiries and assets and so forth. And a lot of people think about escalation, But there's a whole other side of things around the analytics and I guess accessing a CRM. Most people don't connect their bots to a CRM for personalization. I think there's a massive gap there for organizations to both build that for vendors, but also Chatbot, I guess, businesses, clients to make use of this and deliver personalized experiences. I'll leave Bora to talk about this in a bit more detail. And then on to identifying your needs. I'll say from a transport standpoint, I think doing a scenario-based approach, which I saw this used in a couple projects, for me helps mitigate the risk around tenders and selection and getting the right thing. Something our team did a number of times as well is perform desktop reviews, then take it into platform demos from vendors. So we'll shortlist, 5, 10 vendors, ask them for demos, ask them for questions. By then we know what our use cases are, what kind of channels we want to connect with, what kind of features we need, but also the live trials as well. I think a missing piece, you'll see a lot of vendors pitch their product does X, Y, and Z on the box, and then you'll take it home and realize it doesn't, only when you use it in anger, in a real use case. So my suggestion here is to run live trials across, 3 or 4 of your top vendor platforms. And don't just say, does it work? Does it connect? Does it produce an answer? Because that's not a real test, because all these platforms will do that. My recommendation, if you're selecting a platform, is put it through its paces, use it in a live environment to give outcomes for customers. Then you'll know how hard is it to use this platform. Some tools like Microsoft or even Google Dialogflow need a level of technical expertise. Other platforms will require less technical expertise. That will impact your operating model, what resources you have, who you hire into your organization to deliver the outcome and use the platform. So I think until you trial them, you don't really know what it's like, and you don't put it through its paces about what kind of skills do you need to hire for. Can you even find these, or can you shift people's existing roles into this area to then deliver the best outcome for the ROI? The scenario-based approach, I know a lot of tech companies typically, or IT departments will take a very clinical view to features and functions they want the bot platform to do. But again, I try and suggest take a business approach, a scenario-driven approach to what is the use case you want to deliver. Then, step through a table of sorts and say, what's the scenario name? What's driving this particular behavior from a user perspective? What data inputs do we need to connect with? Is there a CRM? Is there history? Is there APIs we need access to? And then, what channels do we want to see this in, both now and in the future? Right. I think when you answer these questions, you start to see that when you run a desktop review and a platform demo and then a live trial, you can very quickly assess, is this the right platform for you? Do you have the right operating model to run this platform, or do you need to spin something else up and request for funding to spin up a whole new team? Do you require integration or escalation to a live chat or a messaging environment? And also the operational model, which I just spoke about. Who will do what within your organization? Who will craft the comms? Who will approve the comms or answers? Who's going to build stuff? Do you have an IT team? Do you not have an IT team? So just, I guess, a few of the considerations around the execution of this. I think I do see companies often go and select a platform where they tinker from a proof of concept stage in the initialize phase, and then they kind of just stuck with it because they aren't willing to go back out to market or do a proper analysis, and then they're left down the track going, gee, this is harder than we thought, harder than we don't have the resources to deliver this, and they tear their hair out. So hopefully all these tips that I've given or considerations will help you on your decision-making process. I guess that's all I had to talk about today. Probably hand over to Bora to do his piece on the technical aspects and the landscape of the market. Hopefully this gives you a strong view of the business-centric view on selecting a virtual assistant platform. Thank you.
Thank
Dennis,
you.
I think there are 2 questions maybe we should address. Bora, what do you think? Shall we address them now?
We can quickly if you want to.
Yeah, let's address, Dennis. It's 2 questions for you. The first one from Maurizio. So, hi, Dennis. When you say to research the costs well, are you going to talk into more details of the calculations of these costs and areas where the costs will be incurred?
Good question. And I think different platforms have different metrics. Some will be based on, I guess, concurrent sessions. And again, how live your sessions are, what channel you are. You have channels like Facebook that kind of have a persistence to it, that you can come back to in a continual conversation, a bit like your SMSs with your friends or colleagues. So I guess there are questions about what do you deem a session to be in that area. And there are other platforms that to my personal opinion, I don't agree with the way they structure things, but cloud computing, everything's about clicks based. How many chats do you handle? How many questions do you ask? How many translations do you do? And I think it becomes very hard for a company, like a business, to forecast what your experience will be. How many questions will you ask on average within a chat to get an answer? And then you got to sum it up to work out, multiply by number of people asking this inquiry, apply your seasonality, ebbs and flows, and say the forecast is going to be X. And I think that's very hard. And I think vendors don't make it easy for businesses to assess what's the ongoing cost going to be. I think it's great from a cloud computing standpoint, that the vendor knows how much money they're going to be spending, because they charge on a per clicks basis and CPU usage and storage and stuff. But I think it makes it very hard for businesses. So I would encourage, if you talk to vendors, ask them to help you model what that cost will look like based on the use cases and the volumes you have, from a licensing standpoint. I guess you should also ask questions around not just the platform licensing, but any connectors to other environments. Sometimes hidden costs are like, I want to launch into a new channel. Boom, they hit you with another fee for a connector to talk to another channel. I've seen some platforms, very large platforms, multinational platforms, where they claim to be real time, but their information is not real time. So I think it's important to tease out all those questions when you talk to your vendors, ask them and run it through its paces. The operating model is important, I guess. What's the ongoing cost going to be to maintain these? I think you should be able to ask your vendors, what's a typical team structure look like when you roll this out, both 1 month from launch, after launching, 3 months, 6 months down the track. What should my team size look like? How much effort should I be spending on your platform? They should have a very clear view on what that takes to build on their platform, and then you can assess, do I have the resources and budget to hire this many people to do that functionality moving forwards? Hopefully that answers your question.
You need to do a cheat sheet with all of these boxes that we need to put, and then send it to everybody, because I think that's really valuable information there. We just need to do the cheat sheet, and we can put a copyright, like our meetup.
Hope someone's taking notes.
We've got
we have recorded. Yeah.
Yes. I do admit on some of the things you just said, I'm like, yeah, sometimes as a vendor, it's like, how long is a piece of string kind of question. How many resources do I need? Well, it depends on what your real scope is. But yes, I otherwise very much agree with what Dennis said with that part. So we just put a new quick poll out that I will be asking in a second as well. I want to understand. As a very short
question.
So what?
As well, or Pavel mentioned
the second question.
Happy to take it later.
Yeah,
I'll take it maybe later. We've got actually not that much time from that perspective, so we'll try to get through mine. So just as a very quick background of mine, I've done at least 3 or 4 different evaluations, platform evaluation in my life. My last one was twice at Bosch, where I was the platform manager for Bosch for all the, whatever, when I left 80 chatbot initiatives that we had, and trying to consolidating on a platform and working on those kind of things. So I've spoken to quite a lot of vendors in my time as well. And these slides are maybe not from my current role as a region manager for Cognigy, but really a lot of my learnings and findings at Bosch and at my previous roles where I've done evaluation, and lots of discussion with Dennis and other people that are in the panel as well, and around that and their opinions. And I hope each one of them will pull me up if they've got some different views on that, and they've got a different idea on those kind of things. So I like that very much. If there's different opinions and can share and learn from each other, that's I think the most important part. So the question was, how many chatbot vendors are there? How many do you think are there out there? There's a little bit of 30% thing over 1,000, 43% 100 to 500. So roughly 60% think there's somewhere between 0 and 500. Gartner in 2009, and in the latest one that I recently talked to them as well, they're tracking over 2,000 vendors in that space, which really describes the complexity of navigating that space. And it is quite a breadth of what is out there from how sophisticated what those platforms can do. So it does make it tricky, to be honest, when you go through the vendor selection to find those vendors, but also, to select the right vendor in many way, shape, form. Oops, just jump my slide once. I want to give a quick overview. This is maybe very classic, for any software lifecycle that is happening, is on how these enterprise platforms. We'll focus a little bit on the enterprise platforms, how they evolved over time. So, like pre-2000 kind of era, this was usually you program, you quite often use keyword matching or some kind of search, mainly keyword matching kind of approaches to build a virtual assistant. There weren't that many people around. There were people, it was really more an experimental phase and very, very, very small focus companies. Then you had other vendors slowly coming into the space. 2011, with the launch of IBM Watson Beta and also the release of Siri, which obviously influenced people really starting to look at it, organizational managers saying, hey, could we do that for our organization as well? And you've got this kind of a launch very often of very expensive systems. So on IBM Watson implementation often was like let's start at $2 million kind of, and then go upwards from that kind of level, even for simple kind of chatbot use cases, very simple FAQ or places. It's where the companies, where the market is kind of learning other places. And then don't want to diss Watson in this case, that was just the case, and it was probably not just Watson, but other providers in that space as well. Hey, AJ, can I put you on mute? I'll put him on mute. And then after that, as classic as the market developed, we got into the space of, provide something cheaper. There were other vendors coming out. There were like the Google buying API AI, bringing out Dialogflow, Microsoft, NanoRep, a whole bunch of other vendors bringing out and bringing a lot of the, let's provide a much cheaper, easier to access application for building those virtual assistants. Admittedly, very often strongly focused on FAQ and knowledge bots. That's really where it came to. And now the market, there's like this whole gray zone. There's quite a strong to the pure players that are really just solely focused on virtual assistants versus the traditional IT vendors, whether you Google and Microsoft that you call in there, but also your Genesys and LivePerson and all those which start adding that functionality into their portfolio. And there's often quite differences in the capabilities of those solutions of, often where you either, if you focus purely on it, you might have a little bit more functionality than others. Then there's obviously integration capabilities in their existing platforms. So it's where the market is going to. What I want to really point out there is usually 5, 10, 20 years in the line, if you look at web content management system or CRM systems, stuff like that, at some point of time, the market really starts to shake out. There's lots of consolidation in the market. You will have then really the traditional players and a few very strong pure players in that space. And you've got then only whatever, like 20, 30 really providers that are really serious providers, and the rest is longer there. We are definitely not at that stage yet. I think, and I'm happy for other people to agree or disagree on that. With over 2,000 vendors in that space, there's still a lot of shaking out to do where we're at, and there's really a large breadth from. Some of them are still like at the very expensive stage or the very much programming stage, to others which are much more ready built from that kind of perspective. I might slip this, given the time, I might skip over that slide. I was just talking about where the stage is at. I might post it later on in the chat. This here links quite strongly to what Dennis was showing you before around the operational model, which fits very strongly to also what platform providers provide out there in the market. There is a classic one is the self-service via API. They're quite often very NLU and LP focused. They've got their NLU, created a development framework around it, created APIs around it. They're bringing out more and more basic UIs for those things where you can manage your intents or maybe even manage a very rudimentary conversation flow. But very often those tools are built for your developers and not for your business people. Your conversation designers will not have much fun with it because they will basically have to tell the developer all the time what to build, and the developer has to build. It's very much focused on coders, and it really depends also where your organization maturity is. One organization that we're frequently talking to is they have a really strong development team. The development team has lots of experience with the tool that they're using. They've built a lot of their own tools around it, and for them it fits really well. And that's actually where at Bosch we've got lots of engineers at Bosch, and we also started with the whole self-service via API tool and found it then later on a bit frustrating because we had to code so many tools before we actually could start building virtual assistants with. Then we've got platform vendors. The other ones are the self-builder via GUI. Quite often there's like this, often a bit cheaper, easy to use. Every kind of business person can click and create a bot together. They often build very much for simple bots. They don't allow really to bring in a lot of data or do any kind of transactional things of raising a support ticket, doing it, troubleshooting, triaging, any of those things. They can hardly do those things because they don't have very good integration frameworks with other parts, but they're often therefore very cheap and easy and quick to use. And it depends on also what your use case is and what the large size, again, of your size of your organization is, the maturity of your organization is, if that is maybe the right fit for you. Then you've got more these enterprise platform players. They're focused on the medium to large scale bots. There's professional services around it. They provide all the kind of functionality that you want to have in there, but they often focus on a professional service firm or yourself as a company to build the virtual assistant in there. And then you've got obviously managed service providers, which was an interesting one for me. At Bosch, I ran into that. So we didn't want a managed service. We wanted to be able to build ourselves. We had a whole team, a center of excellence, the whole shebang, everything. And we really want to build our things as well. And I was sitting in front of this vendor, and we had invited them, and they were definitely one of the well-known ones in that space. And I was stretching my head, why we've asked now so many times to be able to see the back end, and we were able to see, how we're going to build bots and what's going on. And there was just no answer. They just didn't want to answer that question. I was really scratching my head of what is going on. And then I asked them directly a question, are you a managed service provider? Is it like basically your business model is that we have to come to you and you will build the bot for us and do all, maintain it all? And then they said, yes, that's what we do. And that really just clicked it. And it was like, well, okay, that's really not what we're looking for. Thank you very much for coming. And it was nice, but it's not what we want. So those are really, there's some big pillars and sometimes there's some mix and matches between them, but you should really understand what Dennis was talking about, your org structure. What do you want to achieve? What can you do? And you need to then look what kind of type of solution do you want, and then be really clear with the vendors that you're talking to say, this is what I'm looking for. If you're one of the other guys, I'm sorry, this is just, then we will not bring together, and then let's not waste each other's times. I don't see any questions right now. I hear the chat doesn't, I don't know. I can't see the chat for some reason right now when I present.
There was one from
there is a
Natia.
Yeah.
Sorry, Pavel.
Pavel?
Yeah, the thing is go on.
There was one from Natia asking if you could provide some examples of some of those vendors within each of these categories, like, where would IBM Watson fit in this, etc. Bora.
Okay, we might have to take them offline because otherwise so IBM Watson, I personally would usually see more in the self-service via API space, but they also have GUIs and enterprise. It's it's a little bit fluid, for example, in that space. All of the large organizations have started very much in the API provisioning of services. Kind of thing. I don't want to do too much of a vendor review here, and we can have that discussion also afterwards, and people can ask that kind of question, and also the rest. I'm also on the vendor side, so I don't want to bring any bias and any of those kind of things into that discussion either. I want to be very honest and very, very clear for it. As Dennis took a little bit longer of my time, I'll try to run through a few things in here. Here I want to bring some of which I really want you to know what are some key platform components that you should consider and look in from that. You could call them functionality, whatever you want to call it, but those are key functions and components that I expect from a system. One is the end user, the channel integrations, end user UI, from the web chat to voice, contact center to whatever messaging, WhatsApp integrations, and those kind of things. And obviously, depending on your use case, you should look what that means and what they provide in there. Then you've got your admin or developer UI. That is, as just shown with the other diagram, there's a huge range between that, like a tremendous range in the market. There is some things that are really old school looking, also some that really are developed very much for focus on developers, or very much focus on business users. There's very few that merge a little bit. They allow kind of business users and developers to really work in there. And that's to be honest, quite a bit uncommon in the market. I personally like it, but it's not that common in the market. You've got the NLU in the virtual system platform. You could even say, well, I want to maybe use different NLUs, so the platform doesn't always need to provide it, but a lot of them will provide the NLU part as well, the magical understanding part, to understand what the human just asked for. Analytics capabilities. I call it a workflow engine because it's a mixture of an orchestration layer, the ability to connect to other systems, but also that conversational management, and that can be state-based, step-by-step based, whatever, something that holds the conversation and says, well, if the user asks this, then I need to maybe ask them a question back before I can actually answer that, or I need to do a few steps, to manage that, to hold that conversation. Context tracking, obviously, what is the context right now? Some platforms that they have very simple context tracking. Other ones really allow you to, if a customer jumps 2 or 3 times or 4 or 5 times around, the system can still manage the context and can allow to bring people back into their context, what they were starting about. Classic example is I might want to pay for something, but then while I want to pay, I'm like, oh, I actually have to change my payment details. And all while I'm that, I also need to change my address. So, I've got a third jump, and you might have to, just manage it and be able to jump back and forth, those things. Response generation, especially if you want to personalize content, is how strong and what can it do? How can it generate the answer that comes out, either text or image or voice or any of those kind of things. And knowledge management and FAQ content management, it's an interesting one. Sometimes as an organization saying like, no, I want to manage that externally. I don't want the virtual assistant to manage it. Sometimes you say, no, I want the virtual assistant platform to manage because I don't have an external system. You definitely have to look out what you want, and then it can become a key component there. And obviously then integration capability with other data sources and action systems, whatever, from changing an address to raising a support ticket to whatever, fulfilling an order. Any of those kind of things are key components. And some insight how pure play is a differentiator. I will get into that later, Lean, okay? There are some accompanying tools. Some vendors will have those directly in it. Sometimes you want to actually buy them from somebody else. So just I want to basically provide that for you to think about. There's maybe some other stuff that might belong either with the platform I want to select, or sometimes you might specifically say, no, I will buy best of practice kind of tools from somewhere else. I like whatever this tool I like. Analytics is a classic one. We come across quite a lot of customers who say like, well, it's kind of nice that you have some analytics in your tool. Well, we might use it, but to be honest, in our contact center, we use Microsoft Power BI, Tableau, whatever kind of thing. And we want the analytics data to be able to flow in there because we don't want to yet run another analytics tool. So you really have to consider those kind of things. Voice integration, other channel integration, testing framework, and testing tools. Dennis, you mentioned one yesterday night that you saw that is specifically in that domain. What was that again? A testing tool?
Botium, I think, is one of those that do the sort of regression tests or can take existing transcripts and then run your testing regression test suites for you.
I've got another one as well. I have to dig out on our Cognigy website. There's another one that we partner with, and there's QBox for NLU testing. So there's a bunch of different testing tools and things like that that can be do. Design tools, sentiment analysis parts, live chat as a functionality. So, this market, there's a lot of other stuff flying around, and you don't always have to buy it from one vendor, but sometimes you might want to. So you really have to consider what you want to do or what you want to do in that space. Now running through a few common pitfalls that I myself stumbled as well into, and I definitely have seen that a number of times with customers or people that I know in that space and what is going on. One of the first ones is a classic one is to focus on the first FAQ bot. FAQ bots are commonly one of the first things that people do. They will build this, they're like, oh yeah, no, before I do something complicated, I just want people, to be able to answer ask questions. To be honest, it takes you one hackathon, 2 or 3 days of really crunching something to find out that your FAQ bot, as you thought of just one question, one answer, it's very often not going to cut it. It cuts it for certain use cases, but it doesn't do it all the time. Suddenly you need to actually find out, what did it do that customer before? At Bosch, our common one was, if a person calls and I know that they just recently bought a washing machine, then very likely, even if it's an FAQ question, the question will be about that specific washing machine. So trying them to give me what the model is and probably giving me the wrong model, and hence I would give them the wrong answer, is not a good customer experience. It would be much better, even if it's FAQ, to know a little bit more about the customer and hence shape the answer to that. And often enough, you will find, I actually need to ask a question back before I can give them an answer. And suddenly you are actually in flow logic where things are going back and forth and it's no longer just a question and answer. So even though you might think you want to do an FAQ bot, please, I really ask you to do a very quick trial, really a hackathon, 2 or 3 days in a team. Usually shows you already very quickly if that is really what you want to do. And think about the future, what your next step is, what you want to achieve. Because the systems that make it very easy to build just an FAQ one might be not that system that you want once you start going down the next round. And it can be like really a month or 2 months later, you're like, oh, actually I need this and this, and suddenly you find that your system didn't really work out that you wanted to choose. So for vendor selection, that is really important for me, is find out what you want to go and don't just focus on your first FAQ bot from that perspective. Basic intent management, we ran into that one. A lot of fun is, it's fun for a POC where you might have 20, 30 intents, question and answers and stuff like that. A number of systems work out. Now we were suddenly sitting there like, cool, now let's go into production. We've got 400 intents. Darn, the system will not allow us to group those intents together. We can't have different business units working on that. Trying to ever find an intent again is a nightmare. We have to do all kind of manual tracking and using codes handwritten and try to somehow search for them. So if you get though into the FAQ space and really want to do that, if you've got a lot of FAQs, look early on how well the system allows you to manage them. We absolutely ran into that issue and found out that the solution we had originally picked was not the best one for that when we started to get serious in those kind of things. There's other parts to it, grouping, finding, version control, exporting and importing. There's a lot of things that you will find out once you get a little bit into it that you need a bit more. And next one, a common pitfall is, again, sorry, it feels a little bit like a repeat, but focusing on building the initial bot, whatever the bot is. It might be an FAQ, but it might be something else. But forgetting that a bot is not finished on go live. Anybody who does that mistake is really like they should have searched a little bit online on what are common pitfalls in bot projects. Is a bot at go live is absolutely not finished. This is actually where now your optimization and iteration phase really kicks into gear. You have to expect at least a month after the bot phase to still be kind of actively working it. And then it's common that you've got 3 to 6 months of some kind of optimization periods. And that is nothing to do with the technology underlying, oh, it's just because the technology crap. No, it's because as a UX designer, you just cannot guess all the things people will ask you about and what they will do and how they will ask for things. So it's not just about NLU performance, it's actually about a whole lot of things that you will only experience when once the bot goes live. A good question, Pavel. I will definitely answer that one afterwards as well. So analytics is coming in there, updating your intent sample, just general quality assurance. One of the things that I was in a project with is they built a force board, we're all proud, wanting to go into next phase. Had no idea, and they were starting to actually start up changing things in their production system for the next phase. And I like asked them, are you really doing that? Yeah. Oh yeah, now that you're saying that might actually be a problem. And then finding out that obviously they were breaking things left, right, and center because they had no ability for any quality assurance, any kind of checking, did what I just built now break something that I had before. Vendor lock-in, that's one of my personal kind of pet peeves that we had and a decision that we made at Bosch to say the NLU market especially is rapidly evolving. It feels like every year, every second year, another NLU is now the leading NLU. This NLU is now the better one for this language. This NLU is now the better one for this specific domain, whether for medical insurance or whatever kind of it is. So the ability to separate your orchestration framework and your conversation flows from the NLU and separating NLU, especially if you do multiple languages, I personally found very valuable, and it's something that I would suggest to consider. And I think I've got my last part in there. I've got only 2 more slides in there. Is some ANZ specific requirements to think about is obviously hosting, data privacy. I had one of the big vendors try to do a Jedi mind trick on me to say, don't worry, we have that all under control. I said, I don't think our lawyers work that way. This is so you really should be asking them very pointed questions. They sometimes like to really wiggle around and give some very interesting answers in that space. So I definitely have a look at what that really means for you. Speed and latency, obviously, especially if you do any kind of things with speech, it does make a difference if the hosting is in Europe and you want to do things, or in the US and you want to do things. You should see if that really works for you and what is going on. Local implementation resources, kind of an obvious one, and then US English versus Australian English, and then New Zealand English for language, especially again, speech recognition part of. Just in general, those are some things, if you're in the ANZ space, I think you should really consider. I might skip, well, I will not skip over that one too much. I was trying to put a few research resources together. I really hope that people will post some more in the chat. Matchboard.com, obviously we've got Sharon here right now after is presenting. They're a good resource. I did like Gartner. I found especially interesting was Gartner peer reviews is a new one in that space. Where it's actually not, you can sometimes say what you want about analysts, and I did like some of the Gartner stuff personally, but the Gartner peer reviews is actually where customers review, and the questions are a lot. They really check that you're an actual customer and things like that. I like their stuff. Sure, the vendors will, ask the more positive customers to please rate in there, so you might take that with a grain of salt a little bit, but everybody can answer, and you can definitely see that for certain vendors, it's not always just a positive review that is being written there. So I can highly recommend that that part. And with that, I will actually hand over to Dennis for his part, what his key tips, key takeaways are for everybody.
Number one, plan your exit strategy. I say this in jest, but I think Pavel also asked the question about how easy is it to switch. I think with the market constantly shifting, with that many vendors in this space, organizational changes you all have over time, both now and in the future, plan your exit strategy as you enter an engagement. Know how you'll know what you need to own. So that's the second point around the customer experience, the content, the flows, and the data. Make sure you have access to all of this, all the designs for all of it. Make sure your contracts support that so you can exit and lift and shift in the later stage. You know, if you are moving to a new platform, it shouldn't be too painful because, you know, the new platform should make it easier to build content or build flows or train the bot. So that data element you take is all those utterances of what people are saying for a specific sort of disambiguation state or clarification question. All that data should come with you. So it should even be an easier exercise than to say to a vendor, like, here's all our stuff. How long would it take to build one of these? And you could even do a trial, like I suggest. Moving beyond the FAQ, Bora's already spoken about this. And again, I really advocate live trials. That's when you know that they have latency issues or their servers are in the wrong country or you don't have the right resources to manage the platform. So I think that's pretty short tips for takeaway.
Good, and I want to actually add one in there. I find the migration from one platform to another, it really depends on the platforms. It shouldn't ideally be a years and years of project, but if you use a vendor where you had to develop a lot and a lot of tools around it, then this can become a little bit trickier. It has its advantages and perks to build something that is specifically built for you, but it's a lot of technology debt and it can make sometimes migration more difficult. So you really, it's one of the things that we risk. At Bosch, we said at one stage, no, too many virtual assistants, too many things we want to do. We cannot build us too much technology debt that will not allow us to be flexible enough with different bots from that perspective. And I will do my last few tips, which is an interesting one. Again, it was all, don't focus just on FAQ bots, think also about transactional bot. And that, Natalie, I think you asked the question is, Gartner actually brought that up to in a discussion we had with one analyst to say, maybe it's better to, instead of thinking of just FAQ as your first step, to actually more think of a sliver of a specific domain that you want to optimize and automate and basically solve for your customer, make a nice customer self-experience. I mean, that's what it's all about. Really, whatever that is that either, changing address details or payment, it should be something that is big enough that it's interesting, but that you don't try to tackle the whole world and make that experience really well. That's, I think, one of my personal tips. And there's FAQ parts actually to it. So you will find there's transactional parts and FAQ parts, but you don't try to basically solve all the FAQ stuff from everything from the whole company. You really try to say, well, this bot can do X, Y, Z really good for you. It's either an IT support bot that does IT security kind of stuff, or accounts management and stuff like that, or the new spare parts, or does your returns, or whatever kind of stuff. If you can kind of manage that, I think that is a good approach and idea to think about if that could fit to what you want to achieve. Second one, really don't forget to run the bot later. I've seen it so many times. People are really just focused on building a bot and being all happy and those kind of things, and that's it. And then don't focus just on the big IT vendors. That's maybe I also speak from a vendor perspective, but my personal experience, the market is definitely not there yet where it's just the big guys and they're all the best. It really isn't there yet. I would, with that many vendors, I would definitely suggest to also think a little bit beyond that. And I like that we had that at Bosch. We knew from investigating that we would have to build bots in other areas in our company as well. And the ability to reuse certain components and things like that on a long run was very important. Good. With that was it from my side. If there's not any more questions, we really want to hand over to the panel because we're running already late. So Graham has a question I will try to maybe answer just in the chat. I'll hand over to Pavel and let's get into the panel.
Yep. Thanks, Bora. I think we have quite a lot of questions, but let's discuss them after we switch off recording and we can just share a lot of the questions. With that, I want to invite Sharon to run our panel discussion. We invited great experts in this field, and we are going now to discuss in depth about the experience. So Sharon, all stage yours.
Thank you very much, Pavel. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Sharon Melamed, founder of Matchboard. As you can see from my virtual background, I'm beaming into you from near Centennial Park in Sydney tonight. I founded Matchboard in 2012. It's essentially a free-to-use matching platform to help companies find the best fit software solutions and services for their needs. I've been in contact centers and customer service for about 30 years, which probably makes me the oldest person at this event. But I don't get an award for that. So you can find out more about Matchboard at matchboard.com.au. But for now, I'm delighted to introduce our other esteemed panelists. So joining Bora and Dennis, who hop back in as needed for the panel Q&A, we also have Andrew Strack and Adrienne Merlot, which I was joking with Adrienne, sounds like a good red wine. And I can assure you she's even better than a good red wine when it comes to her knowledge of chatbots. Adrienne has spent over a decade working in vendor environments and knows that choosing the right solution to underpin your objectives can be the difference between success and failure. She's also worked for over 5 years, specifically with virtual assistant implementations and optimizations. She now works at Datacom to help organizations choose the right solution, not just for today, but for tomorrow's world. And this will hopefully benefit herself as well, because rumor has it she hates sitting on phone queues and trolling through websites just to find simple answers to questions. The other esteemed panelist we have tonight is Andrew Strack, who is a design-led digital experience and product management specialist with 20+ years helping enterprises transform their offerings. Recently, Andrew was focused on implementing and expanding conversational AI at NAB, leading a visionary change in the way NAB of the future engages with its customers as they demand ever greater simplicity and convenience in their day-to-day banking. Andrew has led UX and product teams at companies like Target, Cotton On, and Quicksilver, modernizing their e-commerce experience while delivering class-leading conversion. He's recently joined Zendesk and is excited to be focused on driving change across their global clientele. Phew, that's the intros out of the way. So now we're going to dive into the Q&A. And so please feel free to post your questions in the chat room and I will read them out for everyone. But I'd like to just kick off with a question, perhaps for Adrienne to start. How have you seen client expectations change over the last few years when it comes to selecting a bot? For example, are people now looking for more advanced functionality? Are they prepared to spend more? What has changed in your view?
Yeah, look, I think and hello everyone. I think it kind of leads to what Bora was saying about that evolution of bots and what people are expecting. A lot of it is people are wanting pretty much what you said, Sharon, but around the other way. So they want higher functionality at lower cost. So that's kind of what I'm seeing a lot from customers at the moment is it's like, we want it to do all of these really cool things, but we want it to be on the cost of a oily rag, basically. So wanting to have all of those forms and functions. I think we're seeing more and more emergence because of the high amount of bot vendors that are out there, and you know, you can Google and find plenty of them open source where you can start to build if you've got the nous to do so. So you also have a lot of people that are like, I can build a bot, it's fine, I can plug it into Slack, I can plug it into Teams, it's all good. But again, you know, people are wanting to have all this high functionality, but then they've kind of put themselves into a corner. So I think they're the main themes that I've seen emerge in the last few years, definitely.
Okay, thanks so much. Question for you, Andrew. What do you recommend people do differently in their selection process now versus in the past, a few years ago, given your experience?
Unmute is always a good thing. Probably just in general, like rather than now and then, these kind of decisions have a natural way to become enormous requirement sets, enormous stakeholder involvement. You spend months desktop researching, you might be able to go down trials, etc., as Dennis said, but you end up in pretty significant checkboxes and you end up in the Salesforce effect. Now, apologies if there's anyone from Salesforce on the line here or has worked with them, but they're a company that basically checkboxes everything, and anything you want from them, you can tick it and it looks amazing on a spreadsheet. Going through enterprise RFPs, which I've very recently been through, they end up with a fantastic score, and you get sold on the dream rather than the reality of what you realistically very much need. And you need to be really honest about what your success drivers are, what your users actually really need, and put it in a time box. Like, what can we possibly achieve in the next maybe 18 to 24 months? And you shouldn't be looking at your tech further out than that in this space at the moment. And that's probably even a little bit far. You should be, what can we do in the next 12 months with something quick, fast, prove value, drive it out. If you've already got something and you're around mid-level, it's like, how do we take that next step up with the same kind of approach? How do we just get to that next level? I've seen very large and been part of very large organizations that run enormous 700 plus requirements that go through the process. Nobody gets a happy answer. Everyone gets upset with each other at the end. You end up with more executives on a project than those working on the project trying to make a decision, and it goes nowhere, which is really unfortunate in some of these. I think if I was looking at it again, it would be that very much, how do we minimize what we're trying to do? How do we get it in fast? How do we make the changes we need to make for this next period and line it up for the one after that? And let your key stakeholders, let the people above you, the decision makers, understand that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to enact change, enact benefit as quick as you can, with as minimal overhead as you can, and provide value where it as quick as possible, rather than spend 12 months trying to plan how to do this, which I've been through. And at the end of 12 months, unable to have added value other than multitude of PowerPoint decks that have cut trees down. That would be my starting point, and war wounds and recent scars that I would add. But yeah, like, just be really honest with yourselves around your capabilities, your capacity, your the funding that you have, the people you have. It will come back and be very helpful. And I know that's very broad level advice, but I tried to find it. There was a survey that went out to a lot of tech leaders across Australia and other places recently. And the number one thing they all came back and said is they would have not overanalyzed their decisions as much as they did when they were making them. They would have made more decisions faster, smaller, dealt with a few mistakes here or there, but would have been able to pivot and get to where they needed to much quicker than the general analysis paralysis that exists in a lot of larger technology groups today.
Thank you, Andrew. That's really sound common sense advice. Just keep it simple, prove the concept. Don't necessarily succumb to all the shiny advanced functionalities that you might hear in the vendor sales pitches to start. Actually, that's an interesting point. I know Bora briefly showed a slide about the hype cycle that Gartner put out for chatbots. And I was wondering, maybe Dennis, you could answer this. What tips would you have for buyers of chatbot solutions to cut through the hype that they inevitably will get in the sales pitches from vendors?
I'm no stranger to having lots of pitches, people trying to sell stuff all the time, in government particularly. I guess cutting through the hype. I think if you have clear scenarios that you want to execute, so you've done the analysis on your drivers, linked them to benefits that you want to achieve, so you have an outcome you want to achieve with your bot you're going to build, then you have clear scenarios that you've assessed that these are the top 5 things we want to build, whether the APIs or FAQs or whatever kind of use case. Then you go in eyes open with a smaller set of requirements, as Andrew has said, and then say, can your platform do the things we need it to do to deliver these key scenarios or use cases? And again, I'm like, run a trial. Like most of these platforms, even Google, you can build a bot in 30 minutes. So spend a little bit of time, try them, because a lot of the larger vendors, what they say on the box isn't what they actually deliver. They tick a box from a requirements perspective and a tenders perspective, but then when you go to actually use it, you're like, holy shit, that hasn't worked so well. So my advice is, just put it through its paces so you understand what you're up for, eyes open. And if you have an exit strategy, then, you can make that 12-month, 18-month decision, as Andrew says, and pivot after that.
Yeah, excellent. We have a very interesting question from Mark Chatterton. What was the one thing you did not expect when you started your chatbot journey? Could be the most recent one or an earlier one. Maybe we'll get a few perspectives on this. Adrienne, can you remember a surprise learning for you when you started out with chatbots?
Look, I mean, I came from call center and, the old school DTMF IVRs and then into the voice IVRs. So I think I actually had someone call it an ancient IVR was the DTMF version. So I quite like that term. So consider it stolen. I think the biggest thing when I started working more in the chatbot space was to really understand those different mediums. And that they are very and vastly different. So, the voice versus the chat versus a website versus all these different digital mediums, social, and all the channels, they are all quite different. And so although you may have fundamentally the same intent from a customer, how that intent is actually portrayed to your systems, as well as then how you need to respond to it, is actually really, really different. And I find a lot of the time that's something that I'm constantly trying to then educate clients and customers on, that you can't just go, yeah, we'll just copy and paste exactly what we've got here into this environment or into that channel or into that different medium, because it doesn't quite work that way. And if you do, you then degrade your customer experience. So I think that was probably one of the big things that I've learnt over time, and then try and impart that, to people I speak with now.
That's a great call out. Andrew, could I ask you to unmute and maybe give your surprise learning, if there was one, when you started out with chatbots?
My surprise learning was that I did not expect to be actually working with Mark Chatterton on my chatbot journey and his team at Ingenious. But I think I had surprise over the actual customer bases that we were working with. There was a lot of predefined sort of knowledge bases and research out there, the type of customers that would use it, their age, their demographics. I actually found a lot of that to be false. And our research with our customers, and this is primarily at NAB, proved that to be all to be false in general. Many people said elderly people won't use it, and etc. as an example. And we ended up having to double down on our own research and really dig into it. And we found a lot of difference in what we expected. We found, a lot of similar use cases that you find everywhere else. But we also, the thing that I didn't expect was the end adoption rate of it. And it was massive. And it was the usage at NAB of its chat feature is only constrained by a legacy technology and legacy CX decision across its digital platforms. The customer wants it. The guys, Dennis and Bora, also touched on things like plugging it into broader systems so you can offer transactionality and greater optionality to what's available and what it can do. Our customers would do that a heartbeat if they could. We simply can't offer that capability. to them, it's challenging to get to that level, and especially in a bank in Australia with the regulation. But they're there, they want it. Their ability to move fast in this space was a lot more than I anticipated coming in.
Okay, thank you. We have another question in the chat, and this is to any of the panelists. During your VA journey, how and when should the business team and the technology team organize themselves together to successfully select, develop, and maintain a VA workforce? Maybe Bora, actually, would you like to chime in on when you see the idea? Is it from the very moment that the sales process starts that you would encourage all the stakeholders from business and IT to come to the table? Or is it better that one initiates the process and brings in the other team later?
Oh, a tricky one. So I think all the way at the beginning, you obviously need the business team. Usually, there's usually a business reason why you do those kind of things. So you need obviously some kind of input from the business, what actually is wanted. I found that it was good for the tech team to quickly take over and filter a bit down from the gazillion options there are to something that is a bit more practical for the organization that is possible. But in my evaluation, I had 6 streams that I was running. I was running the business people because, to be honest, if you're the IT team and select a platform and later on your business team doesn't like it, kind of stuffed up. So you really want to have them early on to be included. The architects, the enterprise security team, the operations team, which everybody likes to forget for some reason, but that are later on supposed to take over that thing and support it and operate and maintain it. Then also your legal team, your data secure legal team, all those kind of teams, and purchasing. And suddenly you've got 6 different players in there. In my most successful one that I did, I brought all of them very quickly. I communicated constantly across all of them. Look, this was happening. I let each one of them have multiple rounds to speak to the vendor. Not the nicest experience always on vendor side at the beginning if you've got basically at least 18 conversations with a company. But as a company, at the end of the day, you really didn't know that what you selected, you get to the right space, because I've done that as well previously, where a team of know-it-all thought they would choose it. They would do 1-day session with the vendor, and then afterwards they would know exactly what the vendor would provide the space, because they're perfectly questioned together in some use case, and that just crashed entirely against the wall. So it was a longer answer, but I hope it gave a good enough overview of what I think should be.
Yeah, that's great. Dennis, if you wouldn't mind unmuting, you've obviously seen many chatbot implementations over time. Have the most successful ones been more IT-led or business-led in your experience?
I have polarizing views perhaps on this, and perhaps unpopular as well. Have been on the vendor side of the fence for 12 years plus, and have an IT background and a technical background. But these days I do try and focus on the business, and my polarizing statement is going to be is it should be business-led. Business pays, business has the money. It's for the outcome of the business and the users. I, in a blunt way, will say keep IT out of it, except to check the boxes to make sure it's, security, compliant, etc. Very, very polarizing view, right? But I think I've seen enough scenarios where IT is custodianship over the platform and they become a bottleneck. Business is like, I want to run faster. I want to get some ROI or benefits out of this. And they just can't, because IT is like holding, I don't know, dawdling along, can't do this, can't do that. Oh, it's too hard. Don't have resources, get in the queue. And so I think if you can find a place there where you don't need IT involved, at least, check the boxes and integrate correctly and all that kind of stuff, then try and keep it within business hands, because they're the ones that build the experiences that have a vested interest to make it work well. I do think that companies like Google and Amazon, et cetera, pitch themselves at IT departments as opposed to businesses. So come for an Amazon developer day and learn how to build a bot in 30 minutes. And that's great for developers. And that's sometimes how it spins out. And then again, the business is like, why are we building this? What's the output? What's the value? So I think, IT teams wouldn't exist without business and money. So polarizing view, I know, not popular, but different lens.
I don't know. There were lots of nodding going on, particularly Adrienne. I noticed you were nodding vigorously,
Yes.
so I imagine you agreed with that.
I was worried, Dennis, that you were going to be like polarizing view IT. I was like, oh, because I'm very much on the same. I'm completely on board. Definitely, I think the business, because they're thinking about it not just from a how can we technically do this, but to the point of some of the stuff that was discussed earlier about the operational model. Who's actually going to be using it? Who's maintaining it? Who's optimizing it? Who's got the finger on the pulse of the consumer that's potentially using that bot and trying to build out those experiences? And I think all too often, solutions that are purely IT led become very IT focused or very technically great and complicated and all the rest of it, and then it gets handed over or thrown over the fence and becomes almost this unusable paperweight to be able to grow upon that. And exactly to Dennis's point, you then become reliant on other resources that are most often then held up in other projects and what have you. And it's a digital medium, right? Like you really can't sit on your hands for too long. It's got to be quick. It's got to be iterative. It's got to change with the dynamic of what's being used. And you can't have that if you're being held back or have a blocker in your IT resourcing.
Okay, excellent. Got another question from Mark. After 1 year of operations, bedding down a chatbot implementation, what are the challenges you would expect to see? Andrew, would you mind commenting on the main challenges after you've bedded down?
How do I keep getting Mark's questions?
Well, you seem to know each other pretty well. So.
He's texting me at the moment too. He's a funny guy. One of the big challenges early on that we were focused on at NAB was more, we kind of preempted it because we could see it happening, was if you're in a large organization, scaling a team to manage the content across the breadth of an organization is going to be extremely difficult. NAB, for its effect, only had 2 copywriters, which became conversation designers with the help of the UX team, etc. But there was no way they could write content across everything, especially in the intent-driven models that we run in, where you literally you can't just deflect to a help article; it's not going to suffice. And so working on hub and spoke models, guideline models, and setting up content repositories and management ways for people across multiple teams to be able to write content for the bot so that the team can input that, take it, train it, run with it, go forward. That was one of the big challenges. The second one was, at some point in time, as has been mentioned earlier here, is your team, your customers, some of the team around you, but especially customers are going to start to want more. If it can answer a few questions, it's better than sitting on hold for an hour to wait for someone to transfer to someone else, and it's probably then out of office hours, so it doesn't go through. If the bot can answer a basic question, can it not simply just update my email address? Can it not simply follow up where my order is at and do all these kind of things? And transitioning from that FAQ sense to some level of transactional kind of capabilities and going forward, that can be significantly challenging on a tech space. And I do love Dennis's view of keeping tech out of decision making in that. As we all know, the hard part is we need them to build stuff. Getting them on board and getting them invested into that journey and getting APIs set up and rebuilt and all those to connect things is a really difficult transition to make. That's one I'd be prepared for.
Okay, thank you. So the life of a tweet is about 10 minutes, I believe. What is the life of a bot? In other words, do they become out of date after a couple of years and then you have to go to market again? Or are the main vendors really just staying on top of constantly iterating best-in-class technology? Maybe Bora, would you like to comment on that?
Wow, that's a tricky one. So So I think we should separate a little bit of bot and the technology, and in that case, what the use case is. So as a bot, you can, if the bot is not continuously maintained and optimized, like, you should really think of a bot like a virtual agent, like an agent that sits in a contact center. Normally you've got all kind of organizational changes, process changes are happening, all kind of things are coming in. If you don't train the bot to do that, then you get the same broken experience as if you don't train your employee in the contact center. And that, whatever, the contact center could even be your front desk, help desk, whatever. The person is trying to give help. If you don't train them and give them a new information, then yeah, it will break. From a technology perspective, well, that's a tricky one because it kind of depends on how your platform is developing. This market, as said, is still very fresh in many ways. There's lots of different vendors, and there are certain vendors that, in Australia, just two of them crashed and burned and are no longer there. To others that have been around for a while, I would really say it depends on, does the development that the vendors bring in still help and maintain what you want to achieve? And I do definitely think you should, every 2 to 3 years, you should definitely have a look around and see what is happening. And it doesn't immediately mean like, oh, I have to replace, but just have a look around and see if somebody else brings something which is better for your fit.
Okay, good advice. We only have time for a couple more questions, actually. I have one of my own. I know with any technology selection process, pricing is always a key consideration. So I'd like to hear perhaps thoughts from Dennis and Adrienne. Are there a variety of pricing models for chatbots, and what are the pros and cons of each? And also, is it hard for the market to really compare vendor to vendor, apple to apple, when there are different pricing constructs? Dennis, would you like to go first?
Yeah, I was just jotting down the question because there's like 3 or 4 parts to it.
Sorry.
Yeah, again, I have polarizing views that I think vendors should do better to move away from their conversations around cloud-based, clicks-based chats, number of sessions you run. I think that's a very infrastructure-based view of the world, and I get it means they have assurance in that space. So again, taking a business lens to it, I feel like if you're able to say that each chat you run costs X cents, X dollars, then it's a much easier mathematical equation for a business to say it benefits, right? It's gonna, if we can deflect this from the call center or can uplift this customer experience, we're only paying X cents per click or per chat. I think it's a much more easier conversation to have, and it helps businesses make that decision to say, you're thinking right and you're helping us make that decision. But I think perhaps vendors don't have confidence in their own platforms if they're doing it based on a model where they can't be sure of profitability. And yes, they should be profitable so that they can continue to run and maintain the platform. But just taking an infrastructure view of the world, I think is very, very, I guess, immature of the vendor to understand how they should be charging. Again, a very polarizing view.
It's so polarizing personally, but what do you think, Adrienne?
Yeah, look, I mean, there are plenty of different pricing constructs, and I think it goes back down to what are you wanting to achieve when it comes to your vendor, because you can have ones which are going to be, oh, look, it's free for setup, but then, oh, you want this or you want that or you want this tiny little thing over here, and price can go up. So you can look at things like that. There are plenty that are working on a per chat basis, but I've seen that there are some others that work on a per interaction, and that's a real gotcha, I think, for people. So trying to know and understand what the difference is between a chat and an interaction and how that might impact not only your design, but also then the pricing. So it's one thing to really consider. There's also integration into other channels. So if you have a virtual assistant, for example, you may be paying for that particular chat. And then if you're escalating to a live chat, which is someone completely different, they might have a different pricing model. So you've got one customer interaction, which may be costing you, potentially doubled up. There's options like that. There's also setup costs, project costs, professional services, but again, it depends on your maturity. So, you know, the question earlier where we were talking about, you know, when do you gather your team to create a virtual assistant working group or what have you, that can also depend on, well, what is your maturity and what is your skill level to be able to deploy such a, you know, such an asset that's potentially going to be at the forefront of your business. And do you need to have professional services help get that off the ground and help with that training process? So all those things have got to be considered. I don't think there's necessarily a one size fits all. And it really goes back to that whole basis. What is success? What are your objectives? And then modeling all of those things into that.
I'm sure if anyone in the audience has further questions around pricing models, you or Dennis would be happy to have a chat, right? Okay, so last question from Mark again. Thank you, Mark. How much, and this one I won't throw at you, Andrew, don't worry. How much should you rely on the vendor and platform to help with the design, the persona, and all that versus having your own resources to drive it? So would anyone like to take that one? Bora, do you have any views around this?
I'm happy to take one. That's a tricky one and an interesting one to answer. I actually had a nice lengthy discussion with Dennis last night, even on that topic. So I do like, as a company, often to be able to do certain things myself as well. I think as an organization, that's good, especially in this space. So the utter reliance on just external consultants, or even the company from which I buy the technologies, maybe something to really see. But I do also see so often that companies just say, we can do it all ourselves. It's so easy. That's not a problem at all. That's a real big, like, it's one of the big pitfalls. We have our tech, and we also say, hey, you can also build really bad things with really good technology. So if you don't know what you're doing, it's like having the best car in the world, but you still will be able to drive it into the ditch very quickly. So with Dennis and I had a big discussion. Dennis, you can really chime in there as well. We're discussing and say, you actually don't need the most senior conversational designer to be there the whole time, every day, the whole thing. But you should, and you probably as an organization won't have those people because there aren't that many people of that. You should engage those people at a minimum to regularly mentor and guide you. I will call them the conversational scrum master, the person that is in there regular enough to say, oh, this is going the wrong way. You should maybe do that this way. You should do it that way. Review what you're doing. I would really suggest getting professional services. It doesn't always mean that the professional services have to run everything, but just thinking that you can wing it on yourself, especially if you've got no experience or very little experience, is a surefire way to stuff this one up. Like, it's a guarantee that you will build one of those chatbots that will become a meme somewhere and people will show it off. That's my personal strong opinion.
Dennis, did you want to add to that, or should we wrap up?
I just think I feel like if you're going to sell a car, you should teach someone to make sure they know how to drive it. So I think it's in a vendor's best interest to ensure they train and how they do the training, separate topic, but they train and before they hand over the keys to the car. If they want their platform to succeed, if they want the customer to get a good outcome out of it, they should be vested to train them. Bora's right. Businesses don't really want to spend the money or don't necessarily understand the value of doing that at this point in time. And they'll learn. It's like through COVID, like I went to save some money. I went to Bunnings and bought my own stuff and built my own things. It's kind of like, in a way, I'm willing to fumble through it at a certain degree. So I think businesses should just at least acknowledge that there are experts out there, like interior designers, if you choose to go on that path. But I think vendors should do a job of making sure their clients are well trained to maximize, that car they've got.
Great words of wisdom there, Dennis. Thank you. I think that's all we have time for, actually. So I'm going to hand back to Pavel, and would just like to thank Dennis, Bora, Adrian, and Andrew for very insightful contributions. Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you, Sharon.
Thank you, Sharon.
Very good panel, very good moderation. It's amazing. So quick. Yeah, very, very good. Okay, guys. So I will be switching off recording soon. We still have a few minutes of recording. Bora, would you like to announce our next session on 16th of March?
I will. I'm very happy to. So we don't have yet all panelists and everything together, but our topic for the next 16th of March is what is the state and the future of the virtual system space, so the smart speaker, the Alexa, Google Home, and those. We want to give we're going to bring together a panel. We've got already 2 very interesting speakers for that, and we'll get a few other speakers in there as well. Where we just ask, the question, what's going on, what's the future in there, where is the space heading, what has changed. There's a lot of very interesting developments of, well, it's not being used as much. What is the adoption? There's some parts where it's used a lot. What is really going on in that space? On where is it really heading to? So that will be the session. And now I still have to put up the Meetup link, but yeah, definitely keep your eyes peeled, and you'll find it. We'll come up soon.
Thanks, Bora. Okay,
I think we
guys.
also had some feedback from the previous surveys that people had asked to shorten the sessions. And so I think the panel event is also an effort to sort of shrink it down so we all can manage our kids or evening schedules a little better.
Yeah, well, we're still going, I think, over 9 p.m., but yeah, it's a lot of things to discuss. Okay, guys, so I will be switching off recording, and now whoever stays, we can discuss the most difficult question and hot questions that you want to do. For those of you who will be looking at the recording, thanks, guys, for joining us. And I'm